I found out my fiance was cheating during our wedding, so I married someone else. I swear I could almost hear the clicking of my own heartbeat echoing across the flower-strewn aisle. The violinist had just finished tuning his instrument. Guests were rustling in their seats, and my bridesmaids whispered last-minute well wishes as they adjusted the lace trim on my dress. I was moments away from stepping into the spotlight when everything came crashing down with a single vibration of my phone. Who keeps a phone in their wedding gown? Well, I did, tucked discreetly into a tiny hidden pocket I'd insisted the seamstress sew in, just for emergencies. And I guess you could call what happened next an emergency, because the message I read in that moment turned what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life into the kind of chaos you only see in a reality show meltdown. Before I dive into the gory details, let me backtrack to how this all began. My name is Caroline, and I've always been a hopeless romantic. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, I spent my childhood daydreaming about the perfect guy, the perfect love story, and, inevitably, the perfect wedding. My parents had a stable, loving marriage that stood as proof true love could exist. I remember watching them slow dance in our kitchen on Sunday mornings, thinking, that's exactly what I want someday. So I guess I set my standards sky high for what love should be. But sometimes, wanting that fairy tale so badly can blind you to the red flags flapping right in front of your face. I met Jake at a bar downtown, which is ironic because I rarely went out. That night, though, my friend Cassie dragged me off my couch and into a loud scene of neon lights and thumping music, determined to prove I needed more spontaneity in my life. I was sipping a club soda at the edge of the dance floor when Jake sauntered over wearing the most confident grin I'd ever seen. He asked if I wanted to dance, and I was about to decline, but something about his easy laugh and the way he teased me for looking so serious made me say yes. That night, we danced until my legs wobbled, and he insisted on walking me to my car. Under the flickering street lamp, I remember how he gently brushed a strand of hair behind my ear and said, "You know, you've got a smile worth staying up all night for." God, I was a goner. For a while, we had this effortless spark. Jake was funny, sweet, and so easy to talk to. He checked all those mental boxes I'd been carrying around. He had ambition. He worked as a project manager at a tech startup. He cared about his family. He talked about how close he was with his sisters. And he made an effort to get along with my parents right from the start. He slipped into my life with disarming ease. And I let him. I was thrilled, thinking all my romantic illusions were coming true. Within 6 months, we were living together in a cozy apartment overlooking the river. Jake would come home late sometimes, always with an apologetic grin and an explanation about a huge project or a work dinner. I shrugged it off. Busy men are successful men, right? I'll never forget our first big fight, though it was more of a confusing argument than a screaming match. We'd been dating about 8 months, and I found a tiny black velvet box in his sock drawer while searching for clean laundry. At first, my heart soared. Maybe it was a ring, but when I opened it, there was just a little gold pendant inside, engraved with an initial that wasn't mine. It read, "Well." I remember staring at it and feeling my stomach twist in knots. I didn't confront him right away, telling myself it could be a gift for a family member. Later that night, I casually mentioned I'd come across a jewelry box while putting away laundry. Jake's expression faltered for a split second before he shook his head and said, "Oh yeah, that's for my sister Lillian. It's her birthday next week." It sounded plausible, so I let it go. When I asked him a week later if he gave it to her, he said yes. She loved it. At the time, I believed him. That was the first sign I ignored. He proposed a few months after that. We were in Hawaii on a group trip with some friends, and on our last evening there, he pulled me aside at sunset, led me down to a secluded part of the beach, and dropped to one knee. He had tears in his eyes as he said, "Caroline, I can't picture my future without you. Will you marry me?" My heart practically exploded. We called our families immediately after, still breathless from excitement, and they went wild with congratulations. My dad cracked jokes about how he'd known from the moment he met Jake that this one was a keeper, and my mom kept asking me to show her the ring on FaceTime. We toasted with cheap champagne back at the hotel, and for the first time in my life, I felt like nothing could ever go wrong again. It was the closest I'd ever been to pure, unfiltered happiness. Over the next year, my life became a whirlwind of wedding planning. I dove headfirst into the details, from picking the perfect stationery for invites to sampling countless varieties of cake. Jake was supportive at first, showing up to consultations and offering opinions on everything from the flower arrangements to the color of the table linens. Then he started pulling back, claiming he was swamped at work. He missed 2 appointments with our caterer and bailed on a venue walkthrough at the last minute. My best friend Cassie teased me, saying guys often flake on wedding chores, and that I should just be grateful he wasn't meddling. Still, something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I brushed it aside, not wanting to dampen the joy of being an engaged woman with doubt. The weeks slipped by, and every day brought us closer to I do. We booked a beautiful historic estate for the ceremony and reception, a place with tall oak trees and a lush garden path leading to a lake. It was picture perfect, exactly the kind of setting I used to dream about. My parents spent a small fortune to make it happen, but they were thrilled for me. I thought I was living the life I'd always wanted, but you know that uneasy feeling you get sometimes? A sense of impending doom you can't explain? I had that in spades. Jake's bachelor party was scheduled a week before the wedding. He insisted it was going to be low-key, just him and a few close buddies hanging out at a local brewery. I recall the uneasy look Cassie gave me when she heard that, like she was about to say something but changed her mind. The morning after, Jake came home looking far more exhausted than I expected. When I asked how it went, he shrugged, saying it was fine. Just some beers and pool. Later that night, Cassie texted me a link to some random bar's Instagram story. In the background, I could see Jake with his arm around a woman in a tight red dress, leaning in way too close. Cassie typed, "I don't want to start drama, but are you sure everything's okay?" I asked Jake about it, and he insisted she was just a friend of one of the guys, that it was totally innocent. "You trust me, right?" he said, looking wounded that I'd even question him. I felt guilty for prying, so I dropped it. I can't tell you how many times I wish I'd pushed harder that night. Finally, the big day arrived. I'd gotten exactly 4 hours of sleep, my mind racing with nerves, excitement, and a vague, unshakable sense of anxiety. My mom and Cassie fluttered around me all morning, helping with my hair, my makeup, my gown. The estate staff was bustling, putting the final touches on the decorations, lighting candles, double-checking the sound system. My dad popped in around noon with sandwiches and a reminder not to forget to eat. Jake was nowhere to be seen. But that didn't alarm me. Tradition says you're not supposed to see each other before the ceremony, right? Fast forward to the moment I was about to walk down the aisle. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear the music. The doors were shut, guests already seated, and Cassie was fussing with my train. That's when I felt the gentle buzz of a text message on the phone I kept hidden in a small, custom-sewn pocket of my gown. I almost ignored it, but a tiny voice in my head urged me to check. I pulled out my phone, thinking it might be my mom or dad with some last-minute encouragement. Instead, it was a message from a number I didn't recognize. "I know this is awkward, but you deserve to know Jake's been lying to you. Check his phone. Ask him about Lily." My stomach dropped. Who the hell was Lily? I stood there, torn between ignoring this bizarre text and feeling an urgent need to confirm it wasn't some twisted prank. Cassie noticed my face go pale and asked if I was okay. I read her the text, expecting her to reassure me it was a weird joke. Instead, her eyes widened, and she quietly whispered that she'd had suspicions for a while but didn't want to ruin my wedding. She said she'd overheard rumors that Jake had been seen around town with the same woman more than once. I felt my throat close up. The wedding coordinator peeked in, whispering, "Caroline, it's time." My pulse thundered in my ears. I had two choices: walk down that aisle and pretend everything was fine, or confront Jake right then and there. My hands shaking, I slipped my phone to Cassie. "Help me," I whispered. She squeezed my arm, nodded, and told the coordinator to give us a minute. My poor dad was already at the other end of the door, waiting to escort me. He had no idea what was happening. I took a few frantic breaths and did something completely out of character. I marched past the coordinator, telling her to keep everyone calm, and slipped around to the side entrance where Jake was waiting with his groomsmen. My plan was half-baked at best. I didn't even know how I'd confront him or what I'd say, but I needed to see his face, to look in his eyes, and know if there was any truth to this. When I found him in a small side room off the main hall, he was alone, pacing like he was trying to shake off nerves. He startled when he saw me, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Babe, you're not supposed to be here." His face looked flushed, guilty almost. And that's when I blurted out, "Who is Lily?" The way his entire expression froze told me everything. He stammered, She's nobody." But he wouldn't meet my eyes. My world began to spin. I grabbed his phone off the table where he'd left it charging, and he lunged to stop me. That was as good as a confession. My hands shook as I tried to unlock it, but I didn't know his passcode. He reached for it again, trying to pry it from my fingers, and I shoved him back with a strength I didn't know I had. We must have made a noise because his best man, Kyle, burst into the room. "Is everything all right?" he asked, looking from me to Jake. I turned on Kyle, demanding to know if he'd been covering for Jake. He hesitated, then said quietly, "It's not my place to say." That was all I needed to hear. My vision blurred as tears welled up. I could almost hear my heart cracking right down the middle. I handed the phone to Kyle and told him to unlock it. He looked miserable. "Caroline, I'm sorry," he whispered, tapping the screen a few times before handing it back to me. There were messages, photos, even short videos. The name Lily was all over them. Sweet nothings. A flurry of conversation about Can't wait to see you again. Wish you could spend the night. I'm counting down the hours until you're mine again. My breath caught in my throat as I scrolled and saw timestamps from as recent as 2 nights before. 2 nights before our wedding. I stared up at Jake, tears streaming down my face, and asked him why. He looked panicked, stuttered something about making a mistake. How it wasn't serious. How it was never supposed to go this far. I felt a wave of nausea. Cassie stormed in then, took one look at my face, and she knew we'd found the ugly truth. A part of me wanted to run away, to curl up in a ball of shame somewhere, but another part of me was furious. Too furious to care about the perfect day or the guests waiting outside. I shouted at Jake that the wedding was off. I screamed it, probably loud enough for half the estate to hear. He begged me to calm down, tried to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "Don't touch me!" I spat, my voice thick with betrayal. He kept saying, I'm sorry, like a mantra that could fix everything. Some groomsmen started trickling in, confused. Then, the wedding planner showed up, looking horrified. My dad barreled down the hallway in his formal suit, the color draining from his face when he saw the scene. I burst into sobs in his arms, telling him everything I just learned, feeling each syllable like a fresh stab in the chest. My mom showed up moments later, tears already shining in her eyes, and then half the bridal party caught wind that something was terribly wrong. An uncomfortable crowd formed, everyone whispering, shooting Jake dirty looks. I never felt so humiliated in my entire life. At some point, I asked everyone to give me space. I stumbled back down the hallway, still in my white gown, my carefully pinned curls starting to loosen from the stress and heat. The entire time, I kept thinking, this can't be real. I'm supposed to be walking down the aisle right now, sealing a vow with a man I thought I knew, but it was very real. Cassie followed me, her voice shaking as she asked, "What do you want to do?" I remember looking around, noticing that many of the guests were starting to stand up, craning their necks to see why the ceremony hadn't begun. I felt this surge of anger at the audacity of it all. Jake's betrayal, the heartbreak I was supposed to endure in private while the world looked on. That's when I snapped. I stormed back to the ballroom doors, threw them open, and marched down the aisle alone. A hush fell over the crowd. My mother gasped. My father hurried after me, but I raised a hand to stop him from speaking. 100 pairs of eyes were on me. They must have seen the tears streaking my makeup, the trembling in my hands. Without mincing words, I announced, "There isn't going to be a wedding today. Jake has been lying to me. He's been cheating on me. I just found out." The collective gasp that rose in that hall was deafening. Some people stood there with their mouths open. Others clutched their chests like they'd just witnessed an accident. I caught a glimpse of my Aunt Linda dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Jake came running in after me, trying to salvage the wreckage, stammering that everyone should sit down, that we could work this out. My father grabbed him by the shoulder and told him to stand back. It was a scene of utter chaos. The wedding planner looked near fainting. The violinist awkwardly started to play a sad note before trailing off in confusion. Cassie whispered that we should just leave, but something in me refused to let this end with me crying in a corner. Then I saw Logan. He was standing off to one side near the open French windows, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Logan was a friend of mine from college, a quiet guy who had drifted into our social circle freshman year. We'd stayed in touch, but our lives took different paths. He always had a bit of a crush on me. He was too shy to admit it outright, but I noticed how he'd steal glances at me or find excuses to hang out. In that moment of heartbreak and adrenaline, an idea sparked in my mind. Something borderline insane. If I wasn't going to marry Jake, then what if I dared to do the most outrageous thing imaginable and married someone I knew would never hurt me? My mind zeroed in on Logan. He was kind. He was loyal. And I'd always felt a sweet warmth when I was around him. Suddenly, I found myself walking toward him, my gown trailing behind me like a ghost of a dream. I stopped in front of him, my voice shaking as I said, "Logan, do you trust me?" He looked confused, but nodded. And then I did the craziest thing of my life. I asked him to marry me right then and there. Gasps erupted from the guests who were already in shock, but this took it to a new level. I think Logan almost fainted. Jake yelled something incoherent, something about me being out of my mind. My dad tried to stop me, but I told him I was a grown woman and this was my choice. Logan looked at me with wide eyes, searching my face for signs this was a joke. I whispered, "I can't marry Jake. He betrayed me. But I need someone who actually cares about me in my life right now." "I know you would never do this to me." Logan hesitated, and I could see the internal battle in his eyes. He was a gentle soul, not one to seize the spotlight, but in the midst of the tension, he did something I'll never forget. He took my hand, squeezed it, and said yes. You can't imagine the uproar that followed. Half the guests were too stunned to move. A couple of them cheered. Some whispered that this was like a soap opera come to life. My mom looked like she might faint. My dad was torn between fury at Jake and confusion at me. And Cassie just stood there, speechless. Jake started ranting about how this was all ridiculous, that we'd spent months planning this wedding, that I was throwing it away for a spur-of-the-moment decision. I spun around and glared at him, telling him we wouldn't be in this mess if he'd been honest and faithful. Logan was still holding my hand, though his palm was clammy. No surprise, considering the bizarre twist of events. It was all so surreal. I kept waiting to wake up from a dream, but I didn't. The officiant, bless his heart, looked like he needed a stiff drink. He cleared his throat and said, I'm not exactly sure how to proceed, but if both parties are consenting adults and the marriage license is in place, turns out the license had Jake's name on it, but we'd brought a blank copy as a backup for some reason. Cassie and the wedding coordinator scrambled around, rummaging through the planning binder, and found a second license that was never filled out. They shoved it into the officiant's hands. Logan and I stood there, trembling, waiting for someone to pinch us awake, but no one did, and the officiant went into autopilot mode. We repeated the vows in shaky voices, tears streaming down my face for reasons that were so much bigger than I could comprehend in that moment. Then came the ring situation. The ring I'd planned to slide onto Jake's finger was still sitting in the best man's pocket. He tossed it over to Logan, who carefully placed it on his own finger, and everyone in the room could see it was too big for him. We didn't care. My ring, ironically, was already on my finger, so that part was out of the way, and just like that, I found myself married to Logan. The officiant declared us husband and wife to a silent, stunned audience. It was the most unceremonious, emotionally fraught wedding pronouncement you could imagine. I looked at Logan, and we both burst into tears at the same time. We were equal parts relieved, terrified, and heartbroken. A ripple of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing. Some people looked outraged. Others, who maybe had a flair for the dramatic, found it thrilling and romantic in a twisted way. Jake stormed off, but not before hurling a few insults my way. He accused me of being a coward who couldn't handle a little mistake. He tried to guilt me by reminding me how much money my parents had spent on this wedding. I stared him down, letting my anger override any lingering love I might have felt. Leave, I told him. Just leave, and he did. That's how, in the span of 30 minutes, I went from almost saying I do to one man to actually saying it to another. After the ceremony, if you can even call it that, a numbed hush settled in. My parents rushed to me, both tearful. My mom whispered, "Sweetheart, are you sure about this?" While my dad shot Logan a protective glare, as if daring him to break my heart. Logan, to his credit, just said quietly, "I'll do my best to make her happy." It wasn't exactly a romantic vow of undying devotion, but it was honest, and that's what I needed right then. Someone honest. The rest of the day was a blur. Some guests left, uncomfortable with the drama. Others decided to stay, whispering they'd already taken the day off and might as well see how it all played out. We still had the catered food, the band, and the open bar, after all. People milled around awkwardly, sipping champagne, offering me condolences or congratulations, not sure which was more appropriate. I caught my reflection in a mirror at one point. My eyes looked puffy and red, my makeup running in streaks. That perfect, radiant bride image was gone, replaced by a woman who looked like she'd just survived a train wreck. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, Logan stayed close, gently touching my arm whenever I seemed about to collapse. It was surreal to have someone else's ring on his finger. In a strange twist, the reception that followed felt like a dream sequence. The band played the songs Jake and I had selected for our first dance, but I ended up dancing with Logan instead, tears sliding down my cheeks. The guests who stayed tried to be supportive, raising toasts to new beginnings, even though none of us really knew what that meant. My father eventually stepped in, giving a short speech about resilience, and how sometimes life forces us to make tough choices. It wasn't the kind of speech you associate with weddings. My mom just kept dabbing her eyes, not wanting to break down in public. When the day finally ended, I slipped out of the estate with Logan, unsure where to go. We hadn't planned a honeymoon, obviously. I'd fully expected to be on a flight to Italy with Jake a few days later, but that wasn't happening now. So we went to a nearby hotel, ironically the same one we'd reserved for out-of-town guests, and took the elevator in silence. Once in the room, I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my wedding dress, while Logan perched on a chair, fiddling with the ill-fitting ring. We didn't say much for a long time. Eventually, he cleared his throat and offered to help me with the zipper on my dress. I turned around, letting him unzip it, and we both realized how surreal this was. We were married, yet we'd never even kissed romantically before that day. I slept on one side of the bed. He slept on the other, with pillows in between us as an unspoken partition. We were two people thrust into a life-changing situation by the force of betrayal and heartbreak. The next morning, we left the hotel early to avoid anyone we knew and drove straight to my parents' house. My mom was already awake, waiting anxiously. She hugged me, tears streaming down her face. "What now?" she kept asking. I didn't have an answer. Logan just looked at me, searching for direction. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire. My phone was flooded with messages. Some supportive, some shocked, some downright judgmental. Jake tried to call me a dozen times, leaving voicemails about how he messed up, how he would have ended things with Lily if I'd just given him another chance. I couldn't bear to hear his excuses. The memory of seeing those messages, those pictures, was too raw. Lily herself reached out at one point, claiming she never knew about the wedding until a few weeks before. Whether that was true or not, I didn't care anymore. Meanwhile, Logan and I tried to make sense of our new reality. He respected my space, letting me grieve the life I thought I'd have. We talked about looking into an annulment, but each time we brought it up, I found myself hesitating. It wasn't because I was madly in love with him. It was because he was stable, patient, and decent in a way that I craved after being blindsided by Jake's betrayal. My dad, who had been skeptical at first, warmed up to Logan when he saw how gentle he was with me. No demands, no grand expectations, just quiet support. About a week after the wedding fiasco, I found Logan sitting on the porch swing at my parents' place, sipping coffee. I joined him, and we sat there for a while, listening to birds and the distant hum of cars on the road. Finally, he said, "I know this marriage happened under crazy circumstances. If you need me to sign papers, I'll do it." No hard feelings. There was a sadness in his eyes, and I realized with a jolt that I cared about him more than I'd admitted to myself. "What if we see where this goes?" I asked softly. He blinked in surprise. "You sure?" he said. I nodded, explaining that I'd rather try to build something real out of this mess than add another heartbreak by erasing it. He reached for my hand, and for the first time in ages, I felt a sense of quiet hope. That's how we began our strange, unorthodox journey. We moved into a small one-bedroom apartment. Nothing fancy, just enough to start fresh away from all the wedding chaos. We didn't sleep in the same bed right away, taking things painfully slow. Our friends were divided. Some thought I was crazy. Others said they admired my courage. My boss at work gave me extra time off to deal with the emotional fallout, for which I was immensely grateful. My parents offered to pay for counseling if we wanted it, and eventually we did see a therapist together, sorting through the layers of confusion and pain that had led us to that fateful moment at the altar. Over the following months, Logan and I carved out a life together that, to my amazement, felt more genuine than the one I'd had with Jake. We cooked simple meals, binge-watched sitcoms, and took walks by the river on weekends. When I cried over the betrayal, Logan would hold me, letting me sob into his shoulder without judgment. I discovered sides to him I'd never noticed. His subtle wit, his deep sense of responsibility, his knack for fixing little things around the house. I learned his favorite color, green, that he loved old jazz records, and that he had a scar on his knee from a skateboarding accident in high school. In turn, he learned how I liked my coffee, how I got nightmares sometimes, and how I needed reassurance that I wasn't going to be lied to again. A year passed. We never had a second wedding ceremony. We didn't need it. We were already married after all, even if we'd done it in the most bizarre way possible. Instead, we took a trip to the mountains, just the two of us. Somewhere along a quiet trail, we exchanged private vows. Ones we wrote ourselves, promising honesty, compassion, and patience. We ended up sitting on a rock overlooking a waterfall, tears in our eyes, but with smiles that felt profoundly real. As I spoke my vow, I found myself thanking him for showing me that love isn't just fireworks and grand gestures. It's also quiet support, shared burdens, and the willingness to stand beside someone even when life is messy. Jake faded into the background of my life. Last I heard, he'd moved to another city. I sometimes wonder if he regrets what he did, or if he's still chasing that thrill of sneaking around behind someone's back. I made my peace with it. Lily never reached out again, and I have no interest in that chapter of my life. The only remnant of that painful day is the memory of how quickly happiness can shatter if it's built on lies. But out of that wreckage, I forged something better. An honest connection with a man I never dreamed I'd marry, let alone fall in love with. People still ask me if I regret how it all went down. The truth is, I regret Jake's betrayal, I regret the pain, and I regret the humiliation in front of all those people. But I can't regret the decision I made at the altar. It was an act of desperation and faith combined. The craziest leap of my life, and it led me to a marriage that might not be perfect or traditional, but it's real, and that's worth more to me than any fairy tale wedding could ever be. So that's my story. The day I found out my fiancé was cheating on me, literally during our wedding ceremony, and how I ended up marrying someone else in the span of about half an hour. If you think it sounds like something ripped from a daytime TV drama, trust me, living it felt even more surreal. But sometimes reality is stranger than fiction, and sometimes a broken heart can open the door to a life you never expected. I'm not saying run off and marry the first friend you see when your partner cheats, but I am saying we all deserve honesty and respect. And if you find that in someone, no matter how unexpectedly, it might just change your life. It sure changed mine.